Hello everybody, my name is Chris and welcome to my YouTube channel, Chris G Photography. I'm kind of the new kid on the block here. This is only my first video about any type of photographic subject or a photographic opinion or even an instruction course, if you will, an instruction video. I do have 3 other videos out there, but they're pretty much just kind of explaining my story in photography. So if you've run across this video and are really kind of curious about who I am and where I've come from, I highly encourage you to look at the other 3 videos. So like a lot of you, I watch a lot of videos on YouTube about photography. It's a good way to figure out what's going on, what new equipment's out there, and what people's opinion are and what they do in photography. And one particular subject matter has really caught my attention, and that is there are a few photographers out there, and maybe there's even more than that, that actually suggest putting your camera in manual mode to really learn how to take pictures. And I've really questioned and really begun to ask whether that's even a good idea or even if it matters. But to really explain why I feel this way, I've kind of got to go back in time to when I began photography in the late 80s. The first 3 cameras that I had availability to, the first 3 cameras that I was given, were a Mamiya 1000S medium format. It was a 645 format. Loved that camera. A Nikon F3, which probably is my favorite camera of all time, and a camera that looked a lot like this. This is an old Nikon F. And this up here, this part on this camera, is the light meter. When I first started in photography, it became very evident to get a properly exposed piece of film. In my case, I shot mostly transparency film. You really had to know how this worked, how the light meter worked. And in this case, and in the first few cameras I owned, there was no automatic mode. So everything was up to the photographer, so you really had to understand how your camera equipment worked. Now, in the case of the 3 cameras that I started out with, all of them had what is called a center-weighted metering system. In other words, there was a center circle, and about 70 or 80% of the information gathered by the light meter was right there, and 20 or 30% from the peripheral edges. And the light meters were actually very, very basic. They did not know the difference between black and white, or you know, if you were photographing snow or whatever. The meters were really calibrated to do one thing, and that was read a middle tone. And in fact, when I went to photography school in high school, when I attended trade school in high school for photography, this is one of the first things we were given to understand exposure, is a gray card. However, if you're out shooting landscape photos, you really can't walk out into the subject, have your camera meter off of right here, and then take a proper exposure. So what you had to do is learn to read your subject. Learn to pick out the middle tone parts of your landscape photo or whatever the subject was, meter off of that to get a properly exposed image. If you didn't understand how your light meter went, you would not get a properly exposed image. I shot a lot of transparency film, and we know it as dynamic range now, but back then it was called latitude. So in other words, the space between a shot with detailless blacks that, you know, that didn't hold any detail, and whites again that were so blown out and they didn't have any detail either. And with transparency film, it was somewhere between 5 and 7 stops, so not a whole lot. Today's cameras have a lot more what we call dynamic range, so a lot better as far as recording fine details and images. So what I've done today is I've actually taken my camera, I have turned off the advanced metering system and turned on the spot metering system. I basically went back in time and exposed some images how you used to have to do it. You used to have to evaluate the scene and make your meter reading according to how you wanted things to turn out. And I did use these 3 little cards as points of reference. So what I'm going to do now is I'm going to shut my camera off. I'm going to stop recording. I'm going to reposition everything and show you the images I took, and we're going to talk about them. And then I will reposition again and give you my opinion why I think that manual photography is either dead or really not even viable. So give me 1 second to reposition and we'll keep talking. Thank you. All right, here we go. I'm sure there is a better way of doing this, but this is the only way I know, so it's just a little primitive. I'm just pointed the camera to my computer screen. So first off, I want to introduce you to my wife. This is someone who will be very active in this YouTube channel. She will be, well, her name is Jennifer, but you will know her as Photo Assistant Jen, or AKA B-Roll Girl, and I'll kind of explain those things later on down the line. Our first exposure here is one that I took using the very almost rudimentary understanding of exposure, and that is the Sunny 16 rule. That if you've got a bright sunny day and there's no clouds and the sun's been up probably about an hour and it's more than an hour before it goes down, that if you use the film speed is the shutter speed. In this case, the ISO was 200, so I selected a shutter speed of 200. If you shoot at an aperture of f16, you will actually get a properly exposed image. Didn't even pay any attention to the camera meter in this particular case. It was on manual, but as you can see, I got a pretty darn decently exposed image of Jenny and her morning coffee. So what I have done is I've turned off the very advanced camera metering system and gone to a spot metering system to emphasize what it means to manually expose an image. The next image is of Jenny, and I've metered off of the gray card here. So put the spot meter right here, adjusted the aperture. I was leaving the shutter speed basically at 250 and just adjusting the aperture ring to come up with a proper exposure. So I spot metered off of this right here, and as you can see, Jenny's flesh tone looks pretty good. The clouds look good. There's a little shadow detail loss over here, but if you notice, the whites here are not blown out, and the blacks that are in the subject on her top are actually very good. So I would probably think for a very basic exposure, this is pretty darn good. So the next image, what I did is I spot metered off of the white card. And when a camera meter sees something like this, and I'm not talking about our more advanced meters today, I'm talking about the general center weighted meterings that we used to have. If you read off of this white card, it basically said, oh my gosh, I'm calibrated to read medium tone, so middle gray, which is the next card over. So it sees this and it wants to overexpose because it's trying to make this gray. It's trying to make everything gray. So as the photographer, what you had to do is go, okay, I want this to be white. The camera is telling me to underexpose, but I know to make this white and everything else the proper tones, I've got to actually overexpose my image. The traditional thinking was you'd want to overexpose about a stop and a half. In this particular case, I only had a third stop increment, so I overexposed a stop and 2/3. Now in this particular case, a stop and 2/3 was probably a little bit too much. As you notice, Jenny's skin tone is blown out. This white card has no detail in it. So this is still a little bit much. But as you can see, it is a lot closer than it was before. That is metering off of the white card and leaving it as is. This is metering off of the white card and overexposing. So as the photographer, you had to know what you were doing to get a proper exposure. The next picture is using the black card to meter off of. And again, the camera, I spot metered right here and it sees this black card and it says, oh hey, I want to make this medium gray. This is really, really dark. So I am going to overexpose this image, and you can tell this image is overexposed. The whites here are completely blown out, her skin tone is gone, the clouds are gone. There's a lot more detail over here, but the rest of the picture is not exposed correctly. So if you were metering off of a darker subject, in this particular case, this black card, you had to tell the camera to actually underexpose. So here is the underexposed image. Now if you notice, and again in this case it's not perfect, the black card now actually shows some details. We've lost everything over here, but if you notice the black card is now black and it actually shows a few details. Whites are good. It's a little bit dark, but again this is a cloudy day, so the sun's kind of coming and going. So I couldn't do an accurate test because of that, but Jenny's skin tone again looks much better. The blacks are really black in this case. The black card is black and the whites look good. So this is how you really had to manually expose your images back when I first started photography. And if you did not know this, you would get an image, your slide film back, and you might get this, or you might get this, because you didn't understand how your exposure meter worked. So one of the first things, matter of fact, the first thing you had to do back when I started photography is understand your exposure meter and how to get properly exposed images. Otherwise, you were just kind of wasting your time. So I'm going to rearrange again one more time and put my camera back where it was, and I will give you my opinion on why manual photography probably, or in my opinion at least, isn't really a viable thing anymore. So give me just a second. Okay, I am back. And like I said, I'm going to give you my opinion or my take why manual exposure, it might not even be a viable option anymore. And again, this is my opinion. If you want to shoot manually on your camera, please do so. I hope you now understand where manual exposure comes from and actually how to do it correctly. And I hope that will actually help you in your photography. But here are 3 reasons I believe that manual photography, or manual exposure anyway, may not be a viable option. First off is the modern camera meter. The camera meter in this thing is incredible. It knows light, dark, color, everything else. This is a very smart meter. This was not. This knows tones. This knew middle tone, gray. This knows white, black, color, everything else. This is a very advanced meter. And if you trust this meter, it will expose the film it will expose the image properly almost every time. And the good thing is yes, you still have things like exposure compensation if you want to tweak the exposure. The second thing is this right here, the screen. It was incredibly difficult for me this morning to actually go out and not look at the exposure on the screen, to completely ignore what I was seeing, because this is a very accurate rendition of what you're shooting. So why not just look at the screen and turn your dials until everything looks right, right? Is that really manual exposure? If you're looking at that, probably not. That's my opinion anyway. And number 3 is post-processing. Is it truly manual? If you go out and expose the way you want to expose your image, take it back home and put it in a computer and post-process. We all know that post-processing is now maybe, arguably, and maybe some of you will disagree with this, the most important part of photography now. We can actually go out and take images that, quite frankly, are not very good, take them home and post-process them until they're masterpieces. So again, does manual exposure really matter? If you're going to use the screen, if you're going to use an advanced metering system, if you're going to use post-processing, why does it matter how you expose, whether it's aperture priority, shutter priority, or manual? Me personally, I choose to use aperture priority, because when you are I will not call myself a landscape photographer, but if you like to go outdoors and take pictures, using the aperture is probably what you're most concerned with, so you can control your depth of field. So I choose aperture priority because that's what I need to control is the aperture. I rely on the screen. I rely on the camera to pick the appropriate shutter speed. Now that does not mean I put my camera in automatic and just close my eyes and start shooting. That does not mean that at all. But I do rely on the technology that is there. What really revolutionized my photography in the 90s is when I got my first, what I will call a modern camera, and that was a Nikon N90S. And I know a lot of people are going, oh my gosh, what an awful camera. It only had center, you could only have one focus point, and it was this and that. But honestly, that again goes back to one of my favorite cameras because it was autofocus, and it was pretty decent autofocus for the time. And it had what was called a matrix meter. So again, it knew the difference between light and dark, and color not so much, but that came along later, I think, in the F5. But that camera revolutionized how I took pictures because of the technology that it offered. At that point, no, I did not do manual exposure. I actually did aperture priority because, again, that was what was important to me. I'm the new kid on the block, and I am not trying to make enemies before I've made any friends. But this is kind of my take on manual exposure. Now, I'm not going to tell anybody to go how to go out and take pictures. That's not the point of what I do. The point of what I do is, as the new person, to maybe bring up a different angle, look at things a little bit differently, and also to look at things through the eyes of a film photographer, not strictly a digital photographer. So for now, my name is Chris. This is my YouTube channel, Chris G Photography, and hopefully this will be the first of many opinion/instructional article or opinion/instructional videos yet to come. So if you enjoyed this, come back, subscribe, contact me. Who knows? Maybe we'll go take some pictures somewhere someday. Thank you.